afternoon, everybody. My name is Ravi Mantha, and I'm here to talk about your health. Specifically, I'm here to talk about bacteria, the good bacteria that live in all of us. Here is a standard model of the human body that is found in all the textbooks. Scientists only recently discovered that this is only explains 10% of who we really are. If an alien abducted you and took you back to their spaceship and they examined you under a microscope, they would see a lot more than this. In fact, what they would see is that your body is only 10% human cells, and the other 90% are actually bacterial cells. They live on you, they live inside you, and most of them are in your gut. Your body is literally a walking pond. You're 65% water composition with 100 trillion living cells of various species of bacteria. Now, in that context, just think about what taking antibiotics really means to your general health. At the very least, you will make a change in your ecological balance, and that has unpredictable results. And yet, 200 million antibiotic prescriptions are written by doctors in the US each year. More than 90% of these are totally unnecessary. The reason they're doing it is because you've paid money, you've seen a doctor, you probably have a viral cold or something, and they want to give you something to make you go home, and so they prescribe you an antibiotic. And that's a very, very bad thing to do. And actually, the news gets much worse because most antibiotics are not even used in human health. 90% of antibiotics consumed in the world today are used by the meat industry, by animal farmers, to fatten cattle and chickens. Can you imagine what antibiotics do to humans who are further up in the food chain who are consuming those products? Now, it used to be thought that our immune system is our best friend. And microbes, you've seen all the ads for disinfectants, right? Microbes are to be avoided, to be washed away. Actually, what we know now is if we are 90% bacteria, how are you going to wash these microbes away? And do you really want to do that? In fact, the evidence now is that your body's immune system and your bacterial ecological system are both important and critical for your health, and they keep each other in check. So health is actually health balance. If your immune system is weak, then bacteria and viruses can invade you and make you ill. If your bacterial system is weak, equally, you can end up with an immune response and an autoimmune disease. And the facts show this as well. 100 years ago, 40% of deaths were due to bacterial infections. Today, that number is only 4% in the rich world. And I'm talking about this room as well. The predominant cause of death in the rich world today is actually autoimmune and immune diseases, 64%. And I'm talking about heart disease, stroke, blood pressure, diabetes. These are all immune diseases. Are you still taking supplements that claim to boost your immune system? Think about that for a moment. Why would you want to do that? Here are just a few of the illnesses caused by antibiotic misuse. Clostridium, which is a deadly infection, acid reflux, obesity, gastritis, celiac disease, eczema, depression, hospital-acquired infections. These are all because of antibiotic misuse. That's where the root cause lies. In this context, using household disinfectants is a load of bullshit. Just use soap and water, and do not be seduced by ads that say that you need to use household disinfectants. The fact is that sanitation and toilets are enough to stop 99% of bacterial illnesses. Antibiotic use should be rare, highly regulated. In India, the real issue is sanitation. People not washing their hands after going to the toilet, and people not using indoor toilets, and people defecating near public water bodies. Those are the problems. It's not about antibiotics. Now, I want to talk about 4 properties that bacteria have. And it's critical for us to understand, to harness their power for good and for good health. The first thing is obviously reproduction. Most bacteria in your body double roughly every 20 minutes. It doesn't seem like a lot, actually, when you think about it. Try doubling a number every 20 minutes and see what happens, how many you get in 5 days. It's in the trillions. In fact, the only thing that keeps bacteria in your body in check is other bacteria competing for the same scarce resources, the food. That's what we call an ecological balance, where different strains of bacteria are all in a fixed number, fluctuating around a fixed number and keeping each other in check inside the confines of your body. The second property that bacteria have, which makes them very interesting, is that they exchange DNA through a process called horizontal gene transfer. So good strains and bad strains can become one or the other. The third thing is quorum sensing, and this is something that we only heard about just in the last decade or so. It is the property that when bacteria of a particular strain are low in number, they're benign. When they start multiplying beyond something called a quorum threshold, they become pathogenic. Why do they do it? We don't know exactly. But actually it seems to be the case even with the rest of the natural world, including humans. I mean, there's lots of us, we create more trouble. Where there's few of us, we tend to be a little bit quiet. And that's true in the bacterial world as well. And when they quorum sense, they can form either vitamins or toxins. They can manufacture these things. It depends on the strain of bacteria. So the interesting thing is, if you can keep bacteria from quorum sensing by maintaining a healthy ecological balance, even pathogenic bacteria like Staph aureus that lives on our skin all the time, or the bacteria that causes pneumonia, which lives in our upper respiratory tract normally. These things are so-called pathogens, but they actually live in our body most of the time and they're not harmful. But when they quorum sense, typically because you have done something that enabled them to multiply beyond the quorum threshold, that's when they become pathogenic. Now, I want to talk about 4 treatments that are coming up which harness the power of bacteria. And some of these treatments are actually quite old. The first thing is the use of cow dung in Indian villages. This has been happening for thousands of years, where people actually take cow dung, they spray it on the walls and the floors, and it's a form of sterilization. Now, think about it. All manure, all dung, is actually about 25% bacterial content. How can you make a disinfectant out of cow dung? It turns out that because these bacteria, at least found in grass-fed Indian cattle, are harmless to humans, what they actually form is a protective barrier on homes and actually prevent pathogenic bacteria from taking root. Now think of what that idea can do to operating rooms, where right now the idea is to create a sterile environment by wiping surfaces free of bacteria, but you can't do it because bacteria multiply too fast. And when you try and create that environment, what happens is you develop strains of bacteria which become resistant, which become more and more powerful, and eventually they overcome that barrier. But what if we could come up with a cow dung equivalent, which is a benign form of bacteria that could be sprayed in operating rooms, that doesn't harm humans, it's not interested in humans, which actually prevents other forms of bacteria from multiplying. Now, I mentioned earlier that use of disinfectants is bullshit, but it turns out that actually bullshit is the most sustainable and best disinfectant. The second thing is a lesson from history. Every civilization, from the Mayans to the Chinese to the Egyptians to the Indians, have discovered that bloodletting is an astonishing cure for a whole host of bacterial infections. They didn't actually know anything about bacteria. They just knew that if a patient showed up high fever on the verge of death, what you would do is you let out a pint of blood, and half the time they recover. Right? Why did they recover? Well, we have a pretty good clue as to that answer now. It turns out that the most common blood disease, which is Staph aureus infection, needs iron. It feeds on the human body's iron to survive and to propagate and to cross that quorum sensing threshold where it starts releasing toxins into the bloodstream. So it actually shows the way forward for hospital-acquired infections. The first thing you should do if you're admitted to a hospital, and if you're a male especially, because men tend to have a lot of iron in their blood relative to women, is maybe you should take a pint of blood out. And we can do a lot more research on this under clinical conditions, but the clues are there in history. So the new slogan is not give blood, save a life, it's give blood, save your own life. The third one is a personal favorite of mine, which is scientists in Essex in England have discovered that there is a bacteria called Mycobacterium vaccae, which is found in dead matter. It's not commensal to humans, it doesn't grow in the human body. But this bacteria lives in soil, in mud, and feeds on dead matter. But when our skin comes into contact with it, it actually stimulates the release of serotonin in our brain. Now, serotonin deficiency is linked to depression. Now, we can do the math and think about it. Gardeners somehow tend to be the least depressed lot. Now, we live in an urban environment where gardens are increasingly a rarity, but if you're feeling down and out, just try this trick. Go outside and put your hands in the flower pot and just rub them gently for 2 or 3 minutes. See if you feel better about it. But this, interestingly, Mycobacterium vaccae is a close cousin of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which causes tuberculosis. And the clue from history is also here. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, turns out, in the Renaissance period, was known as consumption, tuberculosis. And artists would actually go out and actively seek to get tuberculosis. Because as it killed you slowly in the last stages of death, it massively stimulated serotonin release in your brain and made you much more creative. So it's interesting that vaccae is also found to release serotonin, albeit at much lower doses, and it doesn't kill you. So that's a pretty good thing to have. The last thing I want to talk about is the use of probiotics. How many of you have used probiotics? You raise your hands? Okay. How many of you have used yogurt, have eaten yogurt in your lives? All of you. Right? We know that live yogurt is a probiotic. And in my opinion, probiotics are the single greatest advance in science, in medicine, that we are about to see in the next decade. The reason is that we mentioned in the beginning of the presentation that some 60-70% of the bacteria that live on us live in our guts. If you can change the composition of those gut bacteria to a healthier balance, you will actually improve your health. We know from science that healthy people have much different gut bacterial composition than sick people. Now there's a very small problem with this though. The problem is that when you take a probiotic pill, it has to go through the most powerful acid bath you can imagine, stomach acid. And whatever survives has to get into your gut and supplant the ecosystem that's already there. But luckily, science has a technique. You don't take the probiotic pill through your mouth, you take it through the other end. Probiotic enemas. In fact, a scientist in the US, a doctor, a gastroenterologist, he used fecal transplants. So he'd taken sick people who are on the verge of death, taken very close relative of theirs, taken a stool sample, mixed it with saline, and gave it as an enema to the people who are dying. And he showed like a 90+% success rate with curing a particularly virulent form of an illness, a bacterial illness called Clostridium. What I predict is in the next decade we will see massive use of probiotics, both orally and from the other end. And what I also predict is that the pharma industry will not be happy, because when you think about all these uses of bacteria that I mentioned, you will find that one thing in common is that none of them will make the pharma industry much money at all, because they're all natural cures and they're all harnessing the power of your own body. Thank you very much.